Hey everyone, Kyle Walker here. If you love cars, fixing things, or just want to understand your vehicle better, you're in the right place. I share hands-on tips, smart driving advice, and straight-up car talk without the fluff. Make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and stick around till the end. You don't want to miss what's coming up. Let's get into
The
it.
level of in the engine is a routine operation performed almost daily. As a rule, drivers limit themselves to checking whether the level has fallen below the minimum mark, not paying too much attention to the color of the liquid and its consistency, although it can tell about many processes taking place in the power unit. In particular, the presence of tiny metal shavings on the dipstick, which gives itself a characteristic shine, indicates that the oil does not cope with the task of minimizing the friction of motor parts, and you should look for the cause of this phenomenon. Darkening of the oil is an indication that it is contaminated and the fluid should be changed. But the appearance of white emulsion on the dipstick rarely goes unnoticed. Unfortunately, a significant part of the huge army of motorists only approximately and often very superficially realize what it means and what threatens. We offer you a small literacy on this topic. Causes of emulsion formation. Pure oil, despite the presence of some additives and impurities, is not inclined to form foamy inhomogeneities. This peculiarity becomes apparent when water enters the lubricating fluid. How it penetrates into the lubrication system, which in principle is autonomous and hermetic, we will now consider. The main reasons for the appearance of emulsion in the engine oil: loss of tightness of the BC head gasket, burnout, breakdown, or other damage, deformation of the plane of mating of the head with the BC, as a result of which there is a loss of tightness of the connection, appearance of a crack in the housing of the cylinder head/cylinder head unit, condensate accumulation in the crankcase, moisture entering the crankcase directly from the cylinders. It is clear that water does not possess even 1/100th of the lubricating properties characteristic of engine oil, so its penetration into the technical fluid inevitably leads to deterioration of its performance characteristics. A drop in lubricant quality leads to increased friction and faster wear of powertrain parts. At ambient temperature, the mixture of oil and water will be relatively homogeneous, but at high temperatures, characteristic of a warmed engine, water foaming occurs. And it is by the presence of such emulsion of yellow or whitish color on the dipstick you can determine that the tightness of the lubrication system is most likely broken. In conditions of sub-zero temperatures when the car is parked for a long time, water, unlike freezes, creating obstacles for normal circulation of oil through the lines. Lubricant foaming, which begins at medium speeds and is most intense at high speeds, leads to a decrease in the oil drop in the system. As a result, the engine begins to experience oil starvation, the most unfavorable consequence of which is engine seizure. If moisture enters the crankcase from the superpiston space, it means that it accumulates there, increasing the risk of hydrostroke, which usually occurs at the moment of starting the power unit. The coolant ingress into the can be indirectly judged by a decrease in the coolant/antifreeze level. It is quite easy to check this by simply unscrewing the expansion tank cap and making sure that the coolant level has dropped. The check should be carried out on a cooled engine. If there are no visible reasons for the drop in the level of fuel, in the form of leaks and the presence of wet spots under the bottom, then, most likely, it was due to a breach of integrity of the cylinder head gasket or the block itself. According to statistics, it is the gasket that is the most common cause of engine oil dilution, with coolant consisting of water and chemical reagent. Loss of integrity of the gasket occurs either due to engine overheating or due to its natural wear. Therefore, every case of overheating of the power unit should not be left without attention, and first of all it is necessary to check the condition of the lubricating fluid. However, even without overheating, the gasket can also leak, as it is exposed to the high temperatures and pressures characteristic of the combustion chamber. Usually its life is about 100,000 kilometers, after which it must be routinely replaced. However, this operation is recommended after each dismantling of the head. If the gasket is punctured, the power unit will work unstably, and the level of coolant will constantly decrease. Simple replacement of the gasket to eliminate the loss of tightness of the connection between the head and the block may not be enough. If there was overheating of the engine, the surface of the head mating with the block may be deformed, and then it will require grinding. Note that overheating of the power unit is fraught not only with penetration into the lubrication system OX. Exhaust gases can get into the coolant itself, which is manifested by rapid boiling of the liquid, which can be observed by unscrewing the radiator or expansion tank plugs. Another cause of water contamination of engine oil is the appearance of cracks on the BC/GBT housing. The cause of such deformations is the same overheating, freezing of water in the cooling system channels, or mechanical damage. Therefore, it is highly recommended not to pour water instead of fuel oil into the radiator. It does not matter if it is distilled, flowing, or taken from an open source, or if the coolant is of low quality. Dilution of tosol with water in inadmissible concentrations can lead to freezing of the liquid. It is better not to do it at all. Buying ready-made non-freezing solution. Another cause of cracks and changes in the geometry of the cylinder head can be called stopping the engine, which had previously worked. At the limit, at high frost, the effect of a sharp temperature difference, which is the cause of metal defects at the microstructural level. Car bumps, collisions, driving at high speeds on heavily rugged terrain, aggressive driving style. All these are factors that contribute to the appearance of cracks in the block head. The cause of emulsion in the engine may also be condensate accumulation in the engine crankcase. Here the designers are powerless. It is enough to have a significant temperature difference so that moisture from the air contained in the crankcase begins to condense. Recall, fresh air enters the crankcase through its own ventilation system or through the breather. Read also, Ashuno, quality auto parts for an affordable price. Condensation usually accumulates on the walls and then flows to the bottom and mixes with the lubricating fluid. The solution is an oil change, during which it is advisable to flush the lubrication system with flushing fluid. But if the cause of moisture in the is not eliminated, the situation will recur after a certain period of time. Water oil emulsion can also be formed as a result of the ingress of coolant into the cylinders due to heavy wear of parts of the cylinder center. As a rule, water from the cylinders through the piston rings that have lost their tightness gradually flows into the crankcase, liquefying the oil and reducing the volume of coolant. Ways water gets into the powertrain. So, we have already found out that the deformation of the block head is one of the main ways of moisture penetration into the lubrication system, and that the appearance of microcracks usually begins with overheating of the engine. Inexperienced driver, noticing that the temperature gauge arrow begins to rise threateningly to the red risk, checks the level of coolant, and if it drops immediately pours the missing portion into the filler neck. This should not be done. The cool liquid, when it gets into the hot from overheating motor, will lead to metal destruction. Physics course, 7th grade. The opposite phenomenon, metal cracking when water freezes, is also described in detail in school textbooks. Water, freezing, passes from liquid to solid state, expanding in the process of crystallization by increasing the distance between molecules in the ordered crystal lattice. Being in the closed space of the engine cooling system, ice begins to press with force on the surface of the walls of the water jacket of the engine, and if there are inhomogeneities, in this place the metal gives a crack. Usually the plugs are the first to suffer. The liners are also considered weak points. The crack can be microscopic, but continue to expand under the influence of unfavorable factors. Most often deformations are directed inside the motor, not outside, so usually externally such deformations are not visible. As moisture enters the cylinder through these defects, it flows into the crankcase, liquefying the oil. Another route for watering the oil can be a crack in the cylinder head, formed between the cooling and oil lines as a result of the liner turning. In this case, the piston will hit the head with force, which will be manifested by the characteristic knocking of the engine near the crankshaft. Emulsion in the engine can be caused by the sealing rubbers losing their tightness. The water jacket rubbers and liner seals are the most likely to fail, and the culprit is usually the same notorious overheating. As a result, the casings get very hot, and the sealing rubbers, which are not designed for such high temperatures, suffer first of all. However, they can also be destroyed as a result of prolonged downtime of the vehicle. This phenomenon is known under the term drying out. when the rubber product is covered with cracks, losing elasticity. Conditions of condensate emulsion formation. As we already know, water enters the in several main ways, from the cooling system, through defects in the cylinder head and cylinder head assemblies, as well as through condensation. The latter phenomenon leads to the formation of the so-called condensate emulsion. Let us consider in more detail under what conditions this occurs. As is known, combustion chambers need, along with fuel, oxygen, which is supplied to the cylinders as part of the atmospheric air. Its composition includes a certain amount of nitrogen, oxygen, and other volatile gases, but water is also present in ordinary air, though also in a gaseous state. In the middle latitudes, characteristic of much of Russia, the average amount of vapor in the air is 0.2%, absolute humidity in. The tropics can reach values up to 2.5 to 3%. Taking into account the fact that up to 10 cubic meters of air per minute are driven through the car, we get solid volumes. It should be noted that moisture does not always condense intensively. It requires appropriate conditions, significant temperature difference between outside and inside. So this phenomenon is characteristic of the fall and spring period. The largest scale of condensate emulsion is observed in the crankcase, the volume of which is not comparable with the space inside the cylinders, and the temperature conditions here are more favorable to condensate formation. As the fuel assembly burns, hot gases are produced, which contain both carbon dioxide and a considerable amount of water vapor. Entering the crankcase ventilation system, the vapor, rapidly cooling down, condenses, changing to the liquid state usual for the 0-100 OC range. Flowing down the crankcase walls, it mixes with the lubricating fluid. This mixture heats up as it passes through the rubbing surfaces and forms an emulsion. The formation of condensate-type emulsion is especially intensive if the car is used daily in winter time, but trips are made for short distances, to the nearest supermarket, to a nearby place of work, etc. In such cases, the power unit, which has been idle for a long time in the cold, simply does not have time to enter the operating mode. And such conditions are ideal for moisture condensation. What to do if emulsion in the engine appears only on the oil filler cap? There are no such suspensions on the dipstick? Just in this case, you should not worry. It is a direct consequence of such short winter trips, due to the presence of some oil on the cap. You just need to clean it thoroughly and make sure that it is not oily. Another thing is if there is emulsion inside the lubrication system. In such cases, short winter trips should be avoided as far as possible, and if this is not possible, the oil change interval should be halved. Consequences of oil contamination with water. The appearance of white or yellow foam is just a consequence of moisture in the engine oil, contributing to early or late, as luck may have it, diagnosis of the problem. The real consequence of emulsion in the engine is that the lubricant loses its original qualities. Being diluted, such oil becomes more liquid, losing the ability to effectively prevent premature wear of the power unit elements rubbing at high speed. The resulting oil film is unstable, which leads to an increase in the coefficient of friction, which, again in full agreement with the laws of physics, leads to rapid overheating of the rubbing surfaces. The result of oil starvation of the engine is predictable. It's jamming with the need for overhaul or even complete replacement of the motor. Read also, cleaning spark plugs from fouling. So, having noticed the signs of liquefaction of the lubricating fluid, you should as soon as possible to find out the causes of getting into the water in order to eliminate them as soon as possible. And although these problems are most typical for cars parked outdoors, garage storage conditions are also not a guarantee of condensate emulsion, especially if the garage is unheated. In summer, mayonnaise on the dipstick is very rare, but with the onset of fall, the air humidity increases, and this becomes the main cause of emulsion formation. It is important in the cold season to warm up the engine properly before reaching operating temperatures. Many drivers, in order to save fuel or time, go on the road much earlier, which in itself is harmful. Taking into account the danger of condensate getting into the lubrication system, such actions should be recognized as frankly hostile to the power unit. Contamination of the crankcase ventilation system is another cause of emulsion in the oil, but it is not critical. At least the oil will not need to be changed. it is enough to clean the crankcase ventilation. It is much worse when is mixed with coolant, because this situation may well cause serious engine failure. Ways to combat condensate emulsion. To avoid the appearance of condensate emulsion, it is necessary to follow the following simple recommendations. Do not take a long time to warm up the car after a long parking. The reason is obvious. When the engine is running at idling speed, the crankcase ventilation system is practically not used. Moreover, in winter it can take a very long time to reach the operating temperature without load. It is really enough to let the power unit work for 5 to 10 minutes. It is enough, for example, to clean the car from ice and snow. It is true that you should not accelerate immediately, but if you move at a gentle speed, the engine temperature will rise to the working temperature much faster and with fewer consequences. Short trips should be avoided, especially in winter, because the engine, not having time to warm up, is forced to work under load. To get rid of condensation, you should occasionally make long journeys. At cruising speeds, this is ideal for evaporating condensation that has had time to form. You can try to use emulsifiers, special additives that prevent the formation of condensation. Finally, winterizing the engine will also reduce the risk of condensate emulsion. Note that engine flushing from emulsion is practically not used in this case. Emulsion formed by the coolant liquid. This is a more serious problem that requires a thorough diagnosis of the power unit. The appearance of emulsion on the dipstick usually indicates that the engine lubricating fluid has been contaminated with toluene. An additional symptom of this trouble is a constant decrease in the coolant level observed in the expansion tank, with a simultaneous rise in the oil level. Even more information can be given by observing the color and intensity of the exhaust. So, if the smoke from the pipe is dense and white, you can draw conclusions from the breakdown of the cylinder head gasket, through which the antifreeze and gets into the lubrication system. In this case, there may be a reverse penetration, which can be detected by the presence in the expansion tank of a characteristic oil film of dark color. This is an indication of the fall of lubricant in the coolant. The appearance of emulsion in itself is not terrible. It only indicates that the oil is diluted with liquid and has largely lost its lubricating ability. If the problem is left unattended, it will lead to accelerated wear of the parts of the cylinder and CMM, which can lead to overheating of the engine. What to do to eliminate the problem? First of all, find out the source of moisture in the lubrication system. In brief, let us list possible causes once again. Breakdown of the cylinder head gasket. It is treated by replacement and checking the plane of the Holoski for irregularities, which are the place where the gasket is pressed through. If there are significant violations of the geometry of the butt plane, it will have to be given to grinding. Cracks in the cylinder head/cylinder head. The result of 3 factors: mechanical shocks, overheating, and freezing of water in the cooling channels. The way to solve the problem is to replace the block head. BC erosion occurs when using low-quality technical fluids containing aggressive components that lead to destruction of metal structure. Most often erosion is manifested by formation of craters in the area of the channels with coolant, which can eventually spread to the oil channels. Loss of tightness of the heat exchanger gasket, a fairly rare cause, but not for owners of Opel Z18XCR, often encountering such a malfunction. It is far from always possible to quickly localize the cause of the appearance of oil emulsion, especially if these are microcracks. As a rule, they give leaks on a cold engine, and as it warms up, they expand and become tight. In any case, after eliminating the problem, it is necessary to flush the engine from emulsion. This can be done using waste oil with the addition of special additives, or using flushing compositions. Many experts recommend flushing only with the same or similar characteristics of pure oil, but it is unlikely that this method can be called recommended. It is expensive and will not provide the required degree of purification. In conclusion, understanding the causes of emulsion in engine oil is crucial for maintaining engine health and performance. Factors such as moisture intrusion, inadequate oil quality, and prolonged engine idling can all contribute to this issue. By recognizing these causes and taking preventive measures, such as regular maintenance and using high-quality oil, you can help ensure your engine runs smoothly and efficiently. Remember, staying informed is key to prolonging the life of your vehicle. Thank you for watching. And be sure to subscribe for more insights on automotive care.